I'm going to make this a very momentous night with a prediction because and I think I have the credibility for this prediction because I have been called a Trump alarmist for a very long time. They were wrong. I was right. He wasn't going to leave power. Okay. But ever since then, and since the Hollywood Access tape where he said, I'm going to grab him by the pussy, and he survived that, every time he's been done crazy shit and gotten himself in trouble, I said, no, it's not over. I've said that. I've argued with people. Brett Stevens, my good friend, he's on the show next week. He said at one point a few years ago, the Trump thing. I said, no. Tonight I'm saying, I think it's over. I just want to bring up an analogy to one person. Even before we were around, there was a guy named Joe McCarthy in the early 50s, and he had a hold on America. And it blew out in about 2 years, right? 2-3 years, he was the biggest thing, and then it was just, and I feel like eating the dogs, we're at this point. I feel like we're at the Captain Queeg with the strawberries, we're at Denzel at the end of Training Day, I'm King Kong up here. I just think he's gonna lose.
He's hanging in there.
It'll be tied on Election Day, as always it will. The polls will be tied, and then he'll lose. That's my prediction. We'll see. I'm just saying, things aren't until they are. Yeah.
Thank God.
How you feeling now, Al? And keep in mind, I didn't ask what are you feeling. I asked how you feeling. That political illiteracy from Bill Maher is but one of numerous miscalls from liberal media pundits who predicted a Kamala victory and were totally and colossally wrong. It wasn't even close, and we're going to see precisely why. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, but no longer here to help you stay sane during these insane times because you rose up yesterday and you restored the sanity to our nation. But I still would very much appreciate you smacking that bell and subscribe button. Before we dive in here, gang, if you need to catch up on some lost sleep from last night, I've got something you're going to absolutely love. It's called Beam Dream, and it's completely changed the way I sleep, gang. I sip a nice hot cup of Beam Dream, and I kid you not, I'm out like a light, and I have the most restful sleep ever all throughout the night. It's become a nightly ritual of mine that I look forward to. Plus, I never wake up feeling groggy the next morning. Instead, I feel refreshed and ready to take on the day. And they're offering Turley Talks listeners an exclusive discount of up to 50% site-wide for a limited time. Just click on that QR code on the screen or use the link below to get the best night of sleep you had in years and propel your wellness journey into the next stage. Click that QR code or go to shopbeam.com/Turley Talks. That's shopbeam.com/Turley Talks for your amazing discount. Here was the headline, the confident headline from Newsweek yesterday. Yes, this was their headline on Election Day. Newsweek boasted, quote, Kamala Harris predicted to win by nearly every major forecaster. Really? And of course, when you dive into this article, you find utter frauds as representative of these so-called major forecasters. We're talking frauds like Nate Silver and 20-something Zoomers like the morons over at 538 and far left-wing liberals at 538. My personal favorite, the forecast model over at The Economist. Yes, Newsweek featured as one of their major forecasters The Economist. And the reason why that is so blatantly corrupt, if you don't know, The Economist, and The Economist is a British publication. They are rabidly fundamentalist proponents of the liberal international order. Gang, The Economist they publicly endorsed Kamala Harris. Now, that's fine. If you want to endorse Kamala Harris, be my guest. But how on earth can you have an objective forecast model at the same time? Choose one. You can endorse or you can have a forecast model. But you can't turn around. You can't have a forecast model and then turn around and make an endorsement that you hope influences public opinion in favor of Harris. You're putting forward an endorsement that you hope influences your forecast. It's patently absurd, but it reveals precisely the kind of rottenness and corruption that pervades the political class. Then, of course, you had the Democrat strategist, then the absolute frothing at the mouth lunatic James Carville, write an op-ed for the New York Times giving 3 reasons why he predicted Harris would win. Harris could win. She could win. And the reasoning was patently absurd. They were almost as absurd. The reasons he gave were almost as absurd as Bill Maher's prediction. Even the New York Post pointed out how fallacious his reasoning was. And yet it was published in what's supposedly the most reputable newspaper in the nation. Hear it yourself. Here's a sample of the nonsense that passed as political analysis.
We're going to win. Okay, this is not the country I live in. This is just, I refuse to believe that. We're going to win because this is not who we are. There are other reasons. You pointed out brilliantly. The surrogate game, we're 98-2 up. We have every kind of surrogate you can think of. Entertainment surrogates, cultural surrogates, political surrogates, athletic surrogates. Our cup runneth over, and they help coming down the stretch because you can deploy them in many different places, and they can, like Beyonce did.
And then, of course, you have the ultra-liberal Michael Moore. What presidential contest would be complete without Michael Moore's illiterate prognostications?
Last month, you wrote Trump is toast. We're almost 48 hours out from perhaps seeing our first results, but do you stand behind that today?
Oh, even more so. I just keep wondering the gift that the Trump campaign keeps giving us. I don't think they realize, I don't think they really are in touch with where the majority of Americans are at. The majority of Americans do not want this divisiveness. They don't want a threat of violence. We are okay to disagree with each other, but that's where it ends. We go to vote. Who wins, wins. Half the time I've been very happy with who's won, and the other half of the time I haven't been. And we move on with our lives. The fact that the way that what you just played here, I hadn't heard Trump utter those words. I'd heard somebody say that he said them, but to hear him say that about they can shoot through the media, the assassins, go ahead and fire. And all those other things you just played, it's like they really believe that the average normal American wants to hear that. They actually believe that we don't like immigrants. We are immigrants. We are all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of immigrants, unless you are African American or unless you're amongst the first peoples that were here. We are all the product of immigrants.
Now, again, my point here is to simply highlight how vapid the left has become in their political assessments. And speaking of vapid, you had the supposed Nostradamus of election prediction, the rabidly anti-Trump, the viscerally anti-Trump professor Alan Lichtman, and his 13 keys that have supposedly accurately predicted every presidential election in the last 40 years, which is not true, by the way. But just weeks ago, Mr. Nostradamus came out and said this.
My prediction, based on the keys to the White House system, which has been right for 40 years, is that we are going to have a precedent-breaking president, that Kamala Harris will become the first woman president of the United States. The way it works is the keys are always measured against the White House party. They tap into the structure of elections as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. Can things change? Of course. I can't predict what's going to happen in the world, and we have 2 fluid wars, but I've taken that into account in my call. Even if Harris lost both of my foreign military keys, failure and success, she still would be down only 5 keys, one short of the 6 keys that it takes to predict an incumbent party defeat.
Yeah, well, it turns out that Trump stole those keys. They're patently absurd in their categorization and application. They're both radically subjective. And Lichtman allowed his blatant hatred for Trump to inordinately influence his prediction. So, in other words, I don't think he was so much predicting as he was trying to influence. Speaking of liberal academics, many of you may be familiar with something called the primary model. We've used this model before in our past election analytics. It used to be pretty good. The primary model was devised by Professor Helmut Norpoth, and it was made famous when he used to predict Trump's unlikely win back in 2016, which we predicted as well. And what he basically does is he uses the candidates' performance in their respective primaries to predict who will win the presidential election. And the basic gist of it is that primaries are seen as sort of the national election in microcosm. So the one who performs the strongest in the primaries almost always goes on to win in the general election. Now, if I set that up for you, anyone with a semblance of common sense, based on that kind of primary model, who would you have chosen to win this election? Who would you think that this primary model would predict to win this upcoming election? Well, of course, it would be Donald Trump. Why? Because of the two candidates, Trump or Kamala. Trump was the only one who competed in any primaries, right? He's the only one. What made Kamala Harris so unique is that she's the first presidential candidate since the primary system started in the early 20th century to be nominated without ever having gone through a single primary. Well, take a look at this. Despite having not gone through a single primary, Norpoth actually made the claim that the primary model gave Kamala Harris the win. I kid you not. He gave Harris a 75% chance of winning based on a model that predicts her chances by virtue of her performance in primaries that she never competed in. So why am I highlighting all this? I'm highlighting this to draw attention to just how corrupt our establishment has become. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying these people are themselves corrupt. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that they're all part of a corrupt system, a rotting, degenerating system that has clearly corroded their judgments in their respective fields of expertise. I mentioned in an earlier video today an article by journalist Alana Newhouse of Tablet Magazine, who described our politics in a society as being marred by what she calls brokenism. From Katrina to COVID, from fire-engulfed Maui to flood-ravaged North Carolina, more and more people are recognizing that our public institutions and government agencies are profoundly dysfunctional. The entirety of our establishment, the legacy media, certainly the academia, and federal bureaucracy, they're all characterized by an epidemic of stagnation, incompetence, and decay. And so, as we saw yesterday, our politics is realigning around two groups of people, two coalitions. One she calls brokenists. That's us. And brokenists believe that our regime is gone beyond repair. It can't be reformed. It can't be tinkered with. It has to be replaced. And we need something like the shock therapy of a Trump and an Elon and an RFK, total outsiders, to get that done. But on the other side, you have what she calls status quoists. And these are those who know our system is broken. They know our institutions are in need of repair. But status quoists still cling on to the hope that there's still enough integrity in our public institutions to solve the very problems that they've created. And that status quoism, as we saw yesterday, is becoming a harder and harder sell to more and more of the population. And I believe that what we saw in yesterday's election was a massive coalition of brokenness who have had enough with this epidemic of incompetence. From pundits to pollsters to professors, our establishment is clearly broken. Now it's time for Trump and the MAGA movement to rise up and fix it for generations to come.